So I had a very busy day today and I had to go to the bank in the middle of the day. I didn't really have time for lunch. I could only get something really quick. And I wanted something to give me a boost and I was thinking to myself, what could I have? And immediately I knew the answer. I could go to Starbucks and grab myself a coffee. And I knew that despite the fact I was at somewhere I was not very familiar with, there must be a Starbucks at some corner there. And not to my surprise, I found it. And as I was getting my regular order, I was thinking to myself, it is rather amazing that you could find Starbucks almost anywhere. Anywhere you are in the world, almost at every corner, there is bound to be a Starbucks there. Starbucks is so ubiquitous that almost everyone in the world knows it, and we know how it's like, the experience, the taste of the coffee. We all know, despite where we're from, what Starbucks is. Yet despite the familiarity of Starbucks, there is actually a secret that Starbucks has been hiding for a very long time. A secret that I think we can talk about tonight. And that is that Starbucks is actually a bank. Yes, you heard that right. It isn't a conspiracy. This really is a truth. If you were to study the fundamentals and the dynamics of Starbucks' business today, then you'll start to realize that it very much is in fact a bank, and it showcases business ingenuity at its very best. And to really understand this, we have to go back a bit in time and see how Starbucks actually developed and transformed, to really appreciate how it actually operates today and to reveal the truth. It all began in 1971 when the original three founders of Starbucks actually started it in Seattle as a coffee bean store. It wasn't a cafe at the time, it was really just focused on selling these coffee beans. Then it was discovered by Howard Schultz. Of course, we know him infamously today as literally the brains behind Starbucks. But he fell in love with the coffee beans and he convinced the founders to have him on board as the director of marketing and sales. So he worked hard to develop Starbucks. But what happened was Howard eventually traveled to Milan and he was exposed to the coffee culture there, especially the cafe culture. And he realized that Starbucks could be much more than just a coffee bean store. It could also become a cafe, a third place between work and home, a place that you could actually spend time, relax, socialize, and build it into that third place. But unfortunately, the founders of Starbucks was not very happy with this direction. So in 1985, Howard and some investors actually bought them out and bought Starbucks so that they could actually have control. And they began developing Starbucks into the Starbucks as we know it today. The chain of cafes with a very unique experience, yet consistent experience, a third place. Incredibly, within 5 years, Starbucks actually opened more than 100 stores. Then by 1992, Starbucks actually went public and raised money from its IPO, and with the injection of capital, by 1996, Starbucks actually opened 1,000 stores. And it started to grow the culture and the idea that Starbucks is very much a part of modern day life. People started to see Starbucks everywhere, because 3 years later, it grew to 2,500 stores, and by the year 2000, there were 3,000 stores with international locations. It was at this point, a very seminal point in Starbucks history, that Howard decided to actually step down and gave the reins over to a new CEO to run the show. But again, they were very much focused on expanding as many stores as possible, and they really focused on that. And in many ways, they were quite successful in that drive as the locations proliferated throughout the world and became one of the most well-known brands and almost synonymous with the idea of what a cafe is. In fact, at one point, almost every year it was opening 1,500 stores on average. So the pace of development was truly incredible. There was even this sort of effect that happened not only on the cultural sense of the third place that I was talking about, the idea of a place between work and home, but also this idea of a Frappuccino effect, that apparently some economists and some people actually did an index and they actually measured the price of real estate in areas that had Starbucks, and apparently in those areas where Starbucks was nearby, real estate prices was actually much higher comparatively speaking. So this is all truly incredible. Yet in the midst of all that development, something else was happening. That the focus was too much on the expansion, that less focus was actually given to the consistency of the experience and the product quality. So there was not many innovation that was actually going on. And as a result, Starbucks actually started to encounter problems. Cafe goers were not really satisfied with the experience. And in many ways, Starbucks started started to lose sight of where it was going. All of this really toppled in 2008 with the financial crisis, where the stock prices of Starbucks just went to an all-time low. It was then that Howard realized that something needed to be done. So in 2008, Howard came back into the business as its CEO, and he wanted to revitalize Starbucks again, make it relevant and more progressive going forward into the future. And it was at this point of time, Howard wanted to spearhead some innovations into the business. The two key things that he did was that he hired a chief technology officer for the first time ever in the history of Starbucks to focus on the digital aspects of the business, but also he introduced a loyalty program. And both of this eventually combined into the loyalty app that we know today, which originally began as a loyalty card, but eventually now is digital. And Starbucks is truly one of the first few companies in this industry to really spearhead the development and the usage of loyalty programs for food and beverage. Of course, today, in 2021, we know how it works. The idea that instead of actually paying cash, you could actually top up and deposit your cash into the loyalty app and convert it into the Starbucks point and actually use that app to pay for the coffee. Now, the benefit, of course, that we know when we use these loyalty apps, especially Starbucks apps, is that you can actually earn stars, these points that allow you to redeem more drinks in the future and other free gifts. This, of course, is an industry standard today, but Starbucks was really one of the first few companies to do it and do it very successfully. Because today, remarkably, 30% of Starbucks sales is actually accounted by the loyalty app. It is so popular that apparently, globally speaking, 40% of Starbucks customers actually pay by using the loyalty app. So much so that at the end of 2019, apparently, collectively speaking, users actually held more than $1.5 billion in these loyalty apps. Now, you have to take a moment to realize how incredible that is, because if you were to look at banks in general, very few banks actually have more than 1 billion in total assets. They did a study, statistically speaking, less than 3,900 banks, even in the United States, actually had that amount in assets, yet Starbucks has that amount. And this is when you start to cross into territory and the idea that Starbucks is a bank. Because what's actually happening when you deposit and you top up the loyalty app is that you're actually putting money in because you expect that at some point you can redeem the equivalence of the value you've put in. So in other words, what's actually happening is that we are actually giving a loan to Starbucks in the very same sense that we would go to a bank and deposit our money, and that is very much also a loan. Of course, I've talked about fractional reserve banking in my older video. The same thing is happening. Yet what is so ingenious about it is that we're actually giving a loan to Starbucks, this $1.5 billion, at 0% interest. And with this money that Starbucks has actually received from our deposits, they can do whatever they want with it. They could invest, they could open more stores, they could literally move the capital anywhere. In the very same sense that banks do, move the capital anywhere in order to generate profits for themselves. In the very same fashion that banks actually behave. And what is even better is that apparently every year, 10% of the people who've actually deposited and topped up the Starbucks loyalty apps, they actually forget about their amount altogether. And so Starbucks actually has this amount that no one might redeem, which in the industry they call breakage. And according to their financial statements, for the past 4 years, the revenue they've actually gained from breakage is in the average sum of $120 to $150 million a year. So the banking business is incredibly lucrative for Starbucks. And what is so ingenious about it is that despite the fact that Starbucks very much behaves like a bank, it is actually not a bank, at least legally speaking, which means that banking regulations don't actually apply to Starbucks. See, today when I go to the bank and I deposit money, the law would state that legally I'm entitled to withdraw the money that I've deposited. That is my money after all. And the bank's very much holding on to it with my permission. It's very much like a loan in that sense. Yet because Starbucks isn't a bank, when we deposit money into the loyalty apps, the terms and conditions actually state that you're not allowed to exchange the loyalty points back to the currency. In other words, once you've deposited, you can't withdraw it. Perhaps maybe in some very exceptional circumstances, you might be able to, but overall, generally you can't. You can only exchange it for Starbucks products and services. And because there is no regulation, in that sense, banking regulation, where there's a right to withdraw currency from the deposits, unlike banks in the fractional reserve banking system, which of course I've talked about in one of my recent videos, Starbucks does not have an obligation to actually keep some cash reserves that allow people to withdraw. They could essentially do anything they want with the money once they've actually received that top-up you've done. So now we start to see that Starbucks is very much in the banking business without actually being in the banking business, and because of that, they are incredibly lucrative. And this truly represents business ingenuity at its very best. And we can only see that this business will grow much more and more because, like banks around the world, Starbucks is aggressively opening stores everywhere. So the incentive of actually using the loyalty app is there. The incentive to deposit is there because we believe that with their system, we could use it anywhere that we go. Starbucks has that international scale and that ubiquitous network throughout all the countries around the world. And we can only see that this banking business of Starbucks will only grow, grow, and grow. And at this point, we might start to wonder, okay, they're doing deposits, what about currency? Certainly, they must have the skill and infrastructure to even have their own currency. And might they actually do that? And that is a very good question, because the truth is, they've already done that. Because stepping into the picture now is the idea of the Starbucks gift card, where you actually exchange your actual currency for the Starbucks gift card, which is very much a Starbucks currency. You could use that gift card in any Starbucks that you go. And again, the idea is the same. Starbucks is also in the currency business without actually being regulated by the currency business. And because of its ubiquitous scale, it very much has the universality of currency, at least in the way it works in practice. So this is truly very fascinating. And this is why some bank officials, like for example the Bank of Korea, one of the senior bankers there, they've actually gone on record to state that Starbucks is not a coffee company, it is actually an unregulated bank. And this really raises the imagination, because without the regulation there, who knows what Starbucks might do with the money, and who knows what they might actually do next. But based on the way they've actually designed their business, they're not only in coffee, they're also banks, and also very much in the territory of fintech. In other words, Starbucks is a fintech firm as well. So we don't know what will happen next, whether they would also explore other areas in reflection to financial services. But nowadays, with businesses that grow to a certain scale, when they have that level of prestige, brand power, and also infrastructure everywhere, anything is really possible. But our own takeaways from this is that sometimes we need to learn to actually look beyond the conventional, to actually identify opportunities, and also to really see and appreciate how the world around us has transformed. Because when we do that, oftentimes we'd actually be very surprised. So, cheers.